Catalina Aircraft Company has engineered the amphibious multi-role Orcon to support Marine combat operations in aviation assault roles worldwide. Drawing on the historic legacy of amphibious aviation operations, the Catalina Orcon fills a key role of deploying and keeping Marines on mission. Designed for expanded O-line flight maintenance, the Catalina Orcon is built to sustain the amphibious advantage. Visit catalina-aircraft.com to learn more.
Hey Scuttlebutt listeners, welcome to episode 256. This week, we bring you another installment of Semper Cinema with our review of the Marine Corps classic, The Wind and the Lion. I refer to it as a Marine Corps classic because, as every Gen X Marine can attest, clips from the movie have been used as attention grabbers in just about every class, period of instruction, and formal school. The Wind and the Lion stars Sean Connery, Candice Bergen, and Brian Keith. It was released in 1975 and is loosely based on the Perdicaris affair of 1904. To help us break down the film is returning guest, author, podcaster, history nerd, and movie aficionado, Lieutenant Colonel Josh Bates, retired. We talk about the conflict between the film's narrative arc and the historical accuracy of the event it attempts to portray, the cast performances, the film's relevance to modern-day audiences, and what Marines can take away from it. Josh has great insights, and it was a lot of fun to dive into this movie with him. This is episode 256. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Thank you for joining us and your continued support. I'm Vic. I'm here with Nancy.
Hey, Vic. How you doing?
Not too shabby. Not too shabby. How about you?
Pretty good. I'm excited. We're going to talk movies. I think summer is a great time to watch movies.
So, yeah, great call. Yeah, we're in the summer blockbuster season.
Yeah.
And we are going to do a little Semper Cinema talking about, I guess it really wasn't a blockbuster, but we're going to talk about the 1975 film The Wind and the Lion, starring Sean Connery and Candice Bergen. And yeah, this was a movie that I became very familiar with as a young second lieutenant. They kept, like, you know, they have the standard template when you give, especially in organized Marine Corps schools, where you have to have your attention getter. And most instructors would use this specific scene from Wind and the Lion, where the Marines are assaulting through it. And at the time, I had no idea really about a lot of Marine Corps history. I didn't know much about Derna. I didn't really know much about the the affair, I'm drawing a blank on the name. The Perdicaris affair. Thank you very much, our mystery guest for today. The Perdicaris affair. And so I just thought it was a really cool scene of Marines assaulting through a palace in what looked like, 1800s Middle East, and saw it multiple times, and then finally learned that it was from a movie called The Wind and the Lion. I didn't even know Sean Connery was in it, but so that was my sort of introduction to this movie, The Wind and the Lion. And Nancy, you didn't know anything about it before we...
No, I didn't know anything about it, but also put a pin in the whole attention step conversation, because my husband told me what his particular attention step was when he was an instructor, a flight school instructor, and I won't really be able to repeat that so after we're done recording, I'll tell you what his attention step
I just
was.
figured I thought it was just clips from Top Gun constantly.
No, he was instructing, he first started instructing pre-Top Gun, so he didn't have that at his disposal. He just had to be creative. So let's just say he relied on some language that was somewhat colorful.
Oh, okay. One of the things
things
I did do at Amtrak school was we actually had to give a class. It was like one of your modules you had to do. And my intention getter had nothing to do with anything that had to do with the class I was given, because they just said have an attention getter. So I played one of the opening scenes from Predator, where the special forces guys just raid the camp, and then I gave a class on, like, I don't know, the logistics, database system or something. But
that sounds super exciting.
Yeah.
But back to your original question, I had never heard of this movie before, but then when I started watching it the other day to prepare for this podcast, I realized, oh yeah, I have for sure seen clips of that. My mother was a huge, huge movie buff, and there was no movie that she hadn't seen, and she didn't know everything about everybody in the movie, and she could very quickly look at an actor and say, oh yeah, that's so and so, and related to this person, and was in that movie, and just blah 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 blah. My mother loved movies. She grew up war years and post World War II, and she was one of those people who went to the movie every Saturday. You go to a movie, you go to watch several movies, and anyway, so I realized very quickly that I for sure saw scenes of this playing as I was growing up. I just never sat down and watched it with her.
Your mom had actually seen. Okay.
Yeah, and for sure I was really, not to get all morose, but I was for sure wishing, like, oh, I wish my mom was still around, because I definitely would have said, all right, let's sit down and watch this together, Mom, and she would have told me everything about when it came out, and the how people received it when it came out. She would have known all of that. Anyway.
Okay. Yeah, well, and the reason really that we ended up going with this movie was we got a request from one of our recent guests. Sir, Josh Bates, thank you so much for coming on and for suggesting The Wind and the Lion for Semper Cinema.
Yeah, thanks for having me on and indulging my taste in mid-70s John Milius historical epics.
Yeah, no, this is so cool, especially considering, we were talking about your book. We were talking about sort of the genres, the various genres and stuff, and you're in the process right now of trying to do adaptation of your book Baghdad Shuffle. So this was really cool. Yeah, when we ended up recording, you're like, hey, if you guys are gonna do a Semper Cinema, I've got a couple ideas. We're like, dude, hell yeah, bring it on. So very cool. And looking at the posters on your wall there, we're definitely in your Beaton zone right now.
You're a movie guy.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely kind of miss the old school Hollywood approach. I think a lot of the current kind of military content is very like grayscale, serious. Thank me for my service. Call each other brother 17 times an episode. But it's just very kind of heavy and stuff. And it's fun to like kind of go back to the 70s when Hollywood didn't take itself so seriously. Wasn't as worried about things like actual history. Never let the historical facts get in the way of a good yarn.
Don't let facts get in your way.
I mean, and I'm sure we're going to get into all of that, but the first thing that I noticed when I started watching the movie, besides the historical inaccuracies, but again, that's who cares about that, is how bright and colorful and light it felt, and light in terms of mood. And just really, Josh, to what you just said, movies today in general have a very dark look to them from a cinematography perspective. I loved how bright and colorful this was, and it was a nice change up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the aesthetic is like it's a throwback, right? And I mean, if you're gonna be out there like getting confirmed kills with the Mama Luke in your dress blues, like you need it to be on that super saturated, old film stock.
Yes.
35 millimeter or whatever. Yeah, it's got to be like the real deal. So that it makes it a lot better.
Before we get started with the review part, Josh, but why did you want us to sit down and talk about this?
Well, I thought it was really low hanging fruit. When I was going back to some of the old Semper Cinemas, I was kind of surprised you guys hadn't hit this one because, like, as Vic mentioned, every Marine, definitely like at OCS, TBS, or whatever, a Marine officer at least, and I'm sure on the enlisted side they probably got inundated with it as well. You're going to see clips from this movie, right? And a lot of times it's going to be, to try to drive home the importance of a close order drill or something, something ridiculous like that. But mainly, like I say, it's because it's aesthetically, it's very pleasing. It's like a really, and it does feature Marines in an era that doesn't get a lot of attention, from Hollywood. So that's a cool, the picture took place in 1904. So it's, it's kind of pre-World War I. When the Corps was a much different gig back then.
Yeah, and it's post-Derna too. It was interesting, like kind of this whole, the actual event itself sort of kicked off the idea of gunboat diplomacy.
Yeah, totally. And beyond that, I think so. Obviously, there's Marines in the movie, but there's real life Marines in the movie as well. So Brian Keith, the actor that plays Teddy Roosevelt in this one, was a World War II Marine. He was actually a tail gunner in the F4 in the dive bombers, right? In the Dauntless. So that was pretty cool. And then the
I
guy
did
that
not
plays
know
Captain,
that.
I didn't know
the
that
guy that plays
either.
Captain Jerome was actually a U.S. Army Vietnam veteran.
I did see that. Yeah.
Yeah,
He played in
yeah.
what, Dallas, right? It wasn't that sort of where
Yeah, I think he was in Dallas as well. Yeah, Steve Canali, I think is how you pronounce
Yep.
his name.
Yeah.
But
He was in
I think
Dallas.
he did a very admirable job of kind of aping the swagger of early 20th century Marine captain. So
yeah.
props to Steve for making that transition. But yeah, so it's got obviously the Marines are kind of an essential part of the story, and there's actually real Marines that were in the movie, so I thought it was kind of an easy pick for Semper Cinema.
Well, let's jump into it. So, like I said before, The Wind and the Lion, 1975, so the year before I was born, starring...
Wow, thanks.
So it was starring Sean Connery, who plays an Arab, interestingly. And it also stars Candice Bergen in all of her Candice Bergen-ness. Is also mentioned Brian Keith. So Connery plays Mullah Ahmed Razuli, who was the last of the Berber pirates. And it's based very loosely, like I already mentioned, sort of on the assault on Derna, or what we know through the Marine hymn as the Tripoli, and also on this thing known as I'm not pronouncing it right, but the Pennicaris affair of 1904. Did I say that right, sir?
Pennicaris affair.
Pennicaris affair.
Which in real life it was not Candice Bergen's character. It was actually a dude. It was a
Greek American
playboy guy. Yeah.
And it's also it's written and directed by John Milius, who got the Academy Award for his best screenplay for Apocalypse Now.
Yep. Also the director of such classics as Big Wednesday as a surfer. Got to throw that one out there. Red Dawn.
Red Dawn. Come on, man. Wolverines.
Yeah. All kind of the classics from our generation, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, so formative. I mean, I could probably attribute much of my Marine Corps career to having seen Red Dawn 1,000 times as a kid. All right, so let's just start off. So I guess at first let's give our Amazon reviews. Sir, what's your sort of Amazon 5-star review of The Wind of the Lion?
Yeah, I got to give it at least a 4. Again, just kind of on aesthetics, on pacing, on the story itself. I mean, there are some kind of ridiculous portions that, like, there's some aspects that would maybe not fly today. Like we just talked about Sean Connery playing a Berber warlord. That's maybe I don't know. Maybe like Omar Sharif was busy that month or something, so they had to. There was.
I read that they actually looked him up. I read that they looked him up.
He was busy making Funny Lady with Barbra Streisand that year.
There we go. Okay, so yeah, but you just you take Sean and throw some bronzer and some smoky eye on him and let him just go ahead in his Scottish baritone and call it good. So it's that's a big swing, but it somehow works. It's still endearing at the end of the day.
He's Sean Connery. Everything he does is endearing. So that's all I have to say about that.
Completely. Yeah. Not, again, not something that Hollywood would touch with a 40-foot pole these days, but I think in service of the narrative and of the story, it still works. And again, like I said, there's like the old quote from Louis Frank, who was like one of the British spy masters back in World War II. Truth is too precious a commodity to be used lightly, and I think that definitely applies to this story. So yeah, there's a very selective use of kind of historical accuracy, but it's just, mainly it's just got all things that like I dig, right? So again, Marines fighting in dress blues, like absolutely epic scene. And I also like the fact that they gave the Navy bros the gunner's mates are actually the ones wheeling around like the old machine gun. But yeah, just everything about it, like kind of the whole vibe is definitely, a lot of the reviews at the time, was Roger Ebert or Pauline Kael, or, they kind of touched on like they had some heavy jingoism and kind of, I guess it would be like the the America first, America only vibe. Which again, that's a pretty bold thing to be putting out like right at the tail end of Vietnam, right?
Yep.
So it could be. I mean, there was obviously some criticism there, but ultimately, I think even amongst kind of that like hardened, mid 70s, super skeptical cadre of film and art critics, like it still kind of won them over, right? And that's I get it, because it is a compelling story. The pacing's great, the dialogue is great, the character development I think is like where it needs to be without getting too deep in the weeds to where it doesn't interrupt like kind of the breakneck pace of the movie. So yeah, and then again, as we talked about, and then aesthetically, it's a beautifully shot film. There's a lot of cool, like very wide angle, old school, historical, epic kind of tropes on the cinematography side.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they work. Those things those were kind of stereotypical for a reason, right? Because they kind of convey that sense of grandeur and exoticism.
Nice. All right, Nancy, what about you?
I'm gonna say 3.5 stars. 3.5, 4. I don't know. I'm on the fence. I will say I watched this grudgingly because I'm like, I don't want to watch this. But then I was hooked. I was engaged within 90 seconds of the movie starting. I really, really loved it in spite of not wanting to love it. And I don't know why. I guess just because it was a 70s film, I had some expectations for how it might be. And to speak to what you said about the time period and the themes, I wonder if that America First concept wasn't kind of a do we know what month in 75? Was that toward the end of the year?
I didn't see that actually.
I think it was in the summer, so it was like right after the fall of Saigon, I think.
It looks like May 22nd of 75.
Okay. Yeah, so like 30 days.
So early on in the year, early enough in the year. I was just wondering if it was any kind of a nod toward 1976 being the bicentennial, because I vividly remember that time period and how, there was a very prolonged period of patriotism before the 4th of July, 1976. So I was just curious about that. Most of the stuff, Josh, you really already touched on, and I mentioned earlier that I really love the look and feel of it. And in spite of myself, I was able to just ignore any lack of realism or historical inaccuracies, because you know what it was at its heart? It was an entertaining film. And isn't that what movies are supposed to be? I mean, they don't all have to teach us a lesson, or they don't all have to teach us a lesson or make us think about things in a different way. Sometimes you can just go sit down in a movie theater, get yourself some popcorn, or some Mike and Ike's, my candy of choice at a movie theater, and just be freaking entertained for a couple of hours. So I really liked it for that.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to do everything we can to try to dispel the idea in this podcast that you can watch a movie and just be entertained, because we're going to break this damn thing down shotgun style and just take all the fun out of it. But I totally hear you. My wife actually was really funny. We started watching it and then fell asleep. And so then I just woke up early to finish it. And then she heard me watching it and goes, "Hey, are you watching the movie?" And I was like, yeah, I didn't really think you're into it. She goes, "Oh, well, I'll just come down." And so she wanted to see the end of it too. So I was like, "Hey, look, I'll just rewind. I've only been watching for like 12 minutes. We'll just, you can catch up. It's pretty easy." But yeah, I thought that was really funny. Again, I thought it was really entertaining. My review star system at this point, I think, is a little bit inflated because we came out the gate with like a bunch of 5-star reviews. So I'm actually going to go a little bit higher than both of you guys. I'm going to go 4.2, even though the things that I didn't like about it, I really didn't like. I had some issues with it, but I think the entertainment value, like you were saying, Nancy, is really, it really sort of drives it home. And it, like you were mentioning, Josh, it was really easy to overlook some of the stickier points of fact and representation and stuff like that, because
You don't need
the
fact.
at the end of the day, the performance is really good. I thought that, even as I thought they did as good a job as they could to respectfully portray the characters that they were portraying, regardless of, real discrepancies, like Scottish dudes playing Arabs. Um, but at the same time, like, they were speaking Arabic. Like, that was one of the things I thought that they were just going to be making up a language, because most of the dialogue obviously is in English, and that the stuff that they would be doing between each other was just going to be like a low mumbling sort of jibber jabber. But no, they actually, like, they were welcoming each other in the proper Arabic way. They were using at least Arabic phrases. I don't know if they actually had like full sentences. So, but there was an attempt, I think, especially for the era that it was done in, to be respectful, and to, not make it comically offensive. And like you were both of you had mentioned, I really love the aesthetic. I mean, it was nice to get away from a green screen and a CGI backdrop. Like, all of these things were shot on location. I know it wasn't in Morocco. I think it was somewhere, a little friendlier and less tumultuous. But at the end of the day, like, they were on site. They were on the beach. They were in a desertly sort of climate. Like, the horse charge at the end. I mean, they had 100 horses out there with dudes like flipping all over the place. And it wasn't like 10 guys and then a bunch of CGI cavalry in the back. And also too, I thought the pacing, again, like you had mentioned, John, it was really refreshing that not every scene had to be like overwhelming the senses all the time. Like, you really were able to sit with the story, sit with the performances, take in the cinematography. So all of those things, I thought was really endearing, and it was very enjoyable to watch. And then, Josh, like you mentioned, I mean, seeing people in dress blues, especially with the boot, what are those called, like boot gaiters, all the way up to the knee, just kicking ass. And then the classic line, like, "Oh, Captain Drum, you are a dangerous man." It's just like Semper Fidelis, So, anyway, so yeah, I give it 4.2, but like, again, my rating system at this point is a little inflated. But okay, do you have any other comments before we move on to the next sort of talking
Yes.
point on this? Okay.
Yeah, I think we all just need to let go of the fact that Sean Connery had his Scottish accent, because nobody said a damn word when Scottish Sean Connery played a Soviet submarine commander and had his. Nobody said a word. So
very fair, very fair.
That's over now.
Yeah, we're done. You're right.
Noted.
Maybe the Razuli learned English from a Scottish.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I saw one of my favorite improv things was on Netflix. Will Arnett did a series called Murderville, and they would bring these actors on, and they would not tell them anything about what was going on, and everybody else is an improv actor, and they would do this murder mystery. So anyways, they had a guy on there that told him to asked him to do a Pakistani accent. And so he did a British accent, and he's like, "I went to the University of England." Anyways, it's really funny, but yeah, there are plenty of, the nice thing about the British colonial empire is that you could use a British accent almost across the globe, especially during this time period. So, Josh, I guess let's go back to you. Why not higher? Why 4 and not 5?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously like room for improvement, right? I think there was so a couple more things that I like that I think we're going to transition into, okay, one, you got company grade officers that are essentially Jedi mind tricking both the ambassador and the Commodore into making like policy decisions, right? Which, again, as someone who tried to do that as a captain, unsuccessfully, I might add, I really dug it. I think there probably could have been especially while smoking in the chancellery too, right? Like
yeah.
Which is always a good look. Part of me, the history nerd part of me, wishes they would have explained a little bit more of like why the Marines are even off the coast of Morocco at this point. Like why, kind of set the stage on that one a little bit. Again, I think they made some very necessary cuts to that in service of the narrative.
Yeah.
But because like as you mentioned, I was like really, even having grown up, my dad's Marine, joined the Marine Corps right out of college. Like I had very little idea of like what the hell the Marine Corps did in say that first, 2 decades or up until World War One, right? From say 1900 to 1917 or whenever we finally got into the fight. I had very little idea of like what was going on there. So both kind of the history nerd and the Marine in me wanted a little bit more meat on that bone, right? Of kind of like exploring those guys that are, he calls them when he's given like when they're drilling essentially out when they're marching on the palace there. He calls them a company. I think it's mainly just probably like the ship's detachment or whatever at that time. And it would have been kind of cool to see a little bit more of that kind of expeditionary life, right? From the Marines there. But again, it would have it that very easily could have also detracted kind of from the narrative arc. So I get why those decisions were made. I also like the fact that they kind of take the piss out of the German imperial troops down there.
Right.
I think as much shit as Germany gets for their actions in World War One and World War Two, I think a lot of their colonial adventures in Africa in the late 19th and early 20th centuries get whitewashed a little bit. But again, aesthetically, it's always cool. You got like the Prussian dude out there with like the monocle and like the
It was they're looking at the Marines run by and he pulls his monocle out. I'm like, exactly. I don't think that's enough amplification for you, brother.
That's when all the old school Imperial German officers, I think, just get issued that thing with the spiky collar and the Hugo Boss uniforms or whatever. But so I thought it was cool how they tied that in, even though like that didn't happen in real life. As far as we know, there was no skirmishes between U.S. Marines and German troops in Morocco in 1904. But there were some, but there was a lot of tension there too that I think could have built that world out a little bit more. Kind of other than it's not really explained kind of really what the Germans' real kind of designs in North Africa were at the time. And I think that could have added a little bit to the world building. But yeah, I mean, those are all like, pretty minor criticisms of what I still think is a great movie.
Nice.
And when I say, 4 stars based on a 5-star scale, that's also, there's kind of a bell curve there too, right? Because it's in relation to other Marine Corps movies. Again, I take a very expansive approach as to what is that, but it's definitely, it's still towards the top of the heap for sure.
Yeah, agreed. Well, Nancy, let's shift gears on you. Why not lower?
Why not lower? Because you know what? It was what it was, and it was just entertaining. It was, I don't know. I like the idea of just being able to put the movie on, be entertained, have a little escapism. Although, for me, it wasn't really full escapism because that material is material I'm working with all day, every day.
That's right.
But typically it's words on a screen. So I hadn't really thought about that. Maybe that was part of why it entertained me so much, because it was like pressing the easy button for a Leatherneck article. Like in a lot of ways, I didn't have to see any words and make sure the commas were in place and, do any fact check. Well, thank God I didn't do any fact checking of this. I just got to sit back and watch these little vignettes play out on screen, and they're vignettes that I read over and over again in my job at Leatherneck. So
it's true.
It was fun. It was fun for me, and I didn't dig too deep into what was wrong with it. I just suspended my disbelief, so to speak. And again, I did not have to fact check it like I have to fact check everything here for the magazine. I just got to sit and enjoy it and be like, well, maybe, but you know what? I'm gonna let that go. That's someone else's problem.
When I think for me, along those lines, the fact that I knew that it was not an accurate depiction going in,
true,
just it helped me. I'm just gonna hit the I believe button and then just roll. rather than just picking it apart because right off the bat, it's inaccurate. And like Josh, like you mentioned,
Yep.
the actual Pedicurus was a dude, a Greek American, and his I want to say his stepson or son-in-law or something. So there wasn't a woman and children dynamic there, but there was a certain bond. Even in there are, I guess, accusations of potential Stockholm syndrome or whatever, but historical records from both Rizzoli and of Pedicurus speak very fondly of one another. So I mean, there was something there. So in that way, I thought it was cool. Yeah, and I'm along the same lines. I think a lot of times when I watch something and it bumbles along for 90 minutes, I just sort of like, this wasn't accidental. I think that the decisions they made were thought through, kind of, Josh, what you were mentioning about what scenes to depict, what to omit. But one of the cinematic themes that I really enjoyed a lot was the juxtaposition between Teddy Roosevelt and Rizzoli, where they would bracket the two characters. They would show 15 minutes of Teddy, and then they'd show 15 minutes of Rizzoli and Candice Bergen's character, and then they'd go back to Roosevelt. They would sort of do this leapfrogging thing, and you could see sort of the evolution, because they're not obviously co-located geographically. You could see their evolution, their relationship building vicariously through this event that's happening, and they were doing that through this leapfrogging of POV. I thought that was really well done, and you could see, whereas early on they seem diametrically opposed, and then you come to see that actually they're kind of the same person. And I thought that was really well depicted as well in the opening raid of the Berbers. It looks all barbaric and everything as they're assaulting. Was it Fez?
Yeah, where the Pashas. I'm trying to remember exactly. I think it might have been in Tangiers, but
Tangiers. I think you're right. I think it was in Tangiers. But then and then so it looks all barbaric. Like, how could they do this? Officer housing and steal Candice Bergen and her kids. But then you fast forward to the Marines, and you'd mentioned this scene, Josh, where they're they do close order drill, and then they essentially assault through. And I think this time it was Fez, but because they're in close ranks and they're all disciplined, it doesn't look as bad. But I mean, they are also assaulting through the town. They're pushing merchants through their little shacks and stuff. They're beating the goats out of the way, and then they assault through the palace. And so they're the same. I thought that was really cool, the way they showed that. And again, I think this, and we'll get into more what the intention of the movie was. I think there is a sense of American exceptionalism there, but they're also keeping it counterbalanced with what's going on. And so I thought that was really well done, how they showed essentially the good guys assaulting through just like the bad guys had done, but you're supposed to have a different feeling about it. I don't know.
Yeah, that for sure. And I loved kind of the MacGuffin of the Winchester rifle too, right? The kind of the bromance that develops over like the shared admiration for the firearms.
Yeah.
Who hasn't seen that?
All right.
But yeah, I thought that was very artfully done.
Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Echodyne's high-fidelity radars for maritime missions ensure expeditionary forces maintain decision advantage from shore to sea. Rapidly scale, evolve, and maneuver. Echodyne is trusted by defense organizations worldwide. Learn more at echodyne.com.
And now we're back.
So who do you guys think, let's shift to Nancy, who do you think the intended audience is?
My mom in 1975. I don't know. Who was the intended audience? I don't know. Just the American moviegoer.
Okay.
Clearly, it wasn't for the nerdy historian, or I just think it was meant to be an entertaining film. I keep going back to the same thing over and over again. That's what I think.
Okay. Do you think then, because it was meant for the general audience and to be sort of a fun film, do you think that there was something about its location in time that, like, did the nation need a fun, feel-good movie?
Maybe. Also, I mean, just looking at who the stars were and the fact that they, rewrote a character in this historical event to be Candice Bergen and her two children. I mean, she was a big star then, so it was like, hey, in my mind, I don't know, of course, what actually happened, but while I was watching it, what I thought was somebody was like, "Hey, we need a vehicle for Candice Bergen. We need a movie for her. Um,
Yeah.
we've got this one over here, but this is the dude. We're gonna do some reworking, and we're gonna rework the script, and we're gonna have Candice Bergen and Sean Connery in it." That, to me, that's what it was.
That's
Obviously,
hilarious.
I don't know that, but that's the way my mind works.
Well,
I just didn't see any bigger message or picture in it at all. Maybe I'm just an extremely shallow person. I don't know.
yeah, yeah. Maybe, you're a 70s kid, grew up in Wisconsin. You just, everything was just sort of a feel-good thing. I will say, though, you might be onto something because of the minor internet sleuthing I did. John Milius did say that working with Candice Bergen was a huge pain in the ass.
Hmm.
Um, Josh, what about you? Who do you think that the intended audience for this movie was?
Yeah, and so I have like no actual research to back this up. I've seen a bunch of John Milius interviews, and I've never met the guy, never interviewed him or anything, but I I think we might be like overthinking it a little bit. He seems to be kind of the one that's like just by sheer force of will, he's going to write and make the movies that he wants to see, right? And also maybe putting words in his mouth potentially, but like the public doesn't really know what they want.
Oh,
so
nice.
so I'm just gonna package this thing and offer it up, and it worked. It wasn't, you mentioned it wasn't like a blockbuster, but it made money, and it
Yeah.
definitely kept him in the game for sure. Uh, and so I think that was kind of I get that there was like a very real kind of passion project vibe behind this thing for Milius, and I think that plays out. And it's like, well, again, because like if you look at the timing, right, it seems like, oh, this is almost like some sort of political stunt right before the bicentennial, right after Saigon falls, and kind of the ending chapter of America's involvement in Vietnam. But again, I doubt those things. I think probably like a bunch of cocaine and whiskey probably fueled these decisions much more than like the kind of the political climate of the time.
Yeah.
And that these guys were just, he was really kind of hitting his stride and had some wasta there in Hollywood, and decided, hey, this is the thing I want to make, and we can get some stars that will get butts in the seats. We got them attached. Let's do this. So that's kind of that was my impression of it. Now, again, that could be completely 180 degrees, off brand, but that's as a almost 50-year-old guy looking back on a movie that came out 50 years ago. That's
Yeah.
the vibe I get.
No, I love that actually because, that is the thing, like I was joking about when we started, that we're going to squeeze all the fun out of this thing. And you brought it right back, Josh. Fucking A, man. This was a fun movie. We're going to have fun talking about it, and we're not going to be overly academic. Yeah, I love it. So do you think then do you think the movie is trying to communicate that, like, I'm gonna make the movies that I want to see? Is that really what this movie's trying to tell us?
I think so, and I think
Yeah.
there was also probably an understanding of like kind of the silent majority in America. The fact that like even with Nixon getting reelected, even like as all the Watergate stuff's coming out, and the fact that they're despite kind of this like veneer of anti-war, hard left hippie
Yeah.
American hating, that there was still the majority of the movie going populace back then. Was, yeah, I mean, they would accept kind of the darker, more sinister, kind of, a lot of those films that came out in the 70s that were kind of based on like the Parallax View or All the President's Men. These are very
Yeah.
kind of very, very kind of cynical looks at the U.S.'s role. And I think, probably a lot of people accepted that. But at the same time, they're like, both things can be true at once, right? You can have corrupt government administrations that are potentially doing things for maybe financial gain, or for other, less than honorable purposes. But at the same time, hey, we've got an American citizen who's been abducted by some warlord. We've got the resources and the men to go get her back. So let's do it. I think that kind of duality, that again, not to be overly academic about it, but I think that's something that the mid 70s, kind of like New Hollywood, like they understood that, right? Like you can have the conspiracy theory stuff out there and people will buy that, but at the same time they realize that, like, America can still be a force for good in the world, and that we can protect our own. And so I think that's I think that it works both ways. I'm not sure if Milius or any of the people involved in producing the movie were, thinking along those lines or even aware of it. I'm not sure it really matters in the end. But in the end, they got the story out there, and it was well received. And surprisingly, like if you go back through, like I tried to review a lot of the contemporary film critic write-ups on The Wind and Lion that came out in that summer of '75, and overall they were fairly positive, which is a little bit shocking when you look you kind of, because the critic world kind of likes what they like, and you kind of know some of the kind of the political or social bent behind a lot of the ones that had big platforms at the time, in the big papers in New York Times or LA. But yeah, no, I mean, they were actually like fairly positive reviews, which kind of surprised me.
Yeah. Well, that's cool to know. I honestly, I hadn't really even thought about what the folks were thinking about at the time that this came out. I'm sort of just putting it in the, obviously our modern day context. But yeah, no, that's cool to know. Especially considering, again, that, Connery and Bergen weren't the first choices for who they end up picking. So again, it totally ended up working out. I thought along the lines of what you're talking about, Josh, I thought it was really interesting that you're coming out of Vietnam. Like you said, you've got, Watergate, Nixon, a lot of distrust, or at least from what I understand, there was a, sort of a zeitgeist of distrust. And then they choose Teddy Roosevelt, who, they depict as kind of a strong man. Like he is constantly telling his Secretary of State to fuck off, and like he's boxing and he's, shooting guns, there at the White House, or, at least close by. And, the character of John Hay is constantly saying that it was lunacy or whatever it was that he kept saying about Teddy Roosevelt's behavior. And, the character of Teddy makes no qualms about the fact that he's going to use this thing to get elected. But at the same time, and then he finds respect in Razuli because he's somebody that he can relate to, another strong man, another guy who's very focused. And I just didn't think that kind of character, being in the time that it would have been well received. And clearly, it was enough to, put butts in seats and get a actor like, Brian Keith to play him, and did a fantastic job, mustache and all. It was awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great point. I think that like simple narratives can still have complex roots, right? Mm-hmm. And that's like a real, that's kind of like one of the higher forms of artistic achievement, getting kind of this like very simple story across. But then as you start kind of digging beneath the surface, there's a lot of, very complex human emotions, as there is in any story, right? But yeah, I think the ability of the film to kind of get that across, I think is good. And I like it, doesn't, because it's not, there are certain scenes where you could say, okay, they're kind of like pandering to kind of the audience, kind of the America, vibe of the thing. And it was well crafted, right? There was like a real kind of craftsmanship behind the way they did that. Which, nowadays we look back on it and it may seem like, oh, it's almost like a little bit of a trope or whatever. But that's only because the last 50 years, like those kind of narrative devices like that worked have been used so often, right? That we're so much more exposed to them. Whereas at the time, not to say that they were like revolutionary or new in 1975, but there was just less kind of like cultural saturation with those kind of approaches. So.
Yeah, sure. And like as we're talking, we joked about this being the our Semper Cinema for the summer blockbuster season, but back then summer blockbusters you would get maybe 3 or 4 really big, high budget, big name movies. Now you get like 4 a month.
I mean, just the whole idea of like the monoculture in America back in the 70s versus where it is now, right? Where everything is like very niche and very compartmentalized, and all these different like streaming platforms, and you can get and social media, there's just all kinds of like avenues, all kind of vectors of different like entertainment where you don't have like the same common experience of a majority of the public watching the same movies, reading the same novels, etc. So it's kind of hard, it's not living in that monoculture anymore. It's hard to kind of understand, I think, maybe like kind of the impact or some of the kind of the legacy of what that did for the consumers.
Well, Josh, I'll ask you this question, or start you off on this question. Then you'd mentioned sort of the simplicity or the complexity of simple stories or simple narratives. Do you think there's something about strongmen that John Milius is drawn to? Because he obviously did this movie, he read Dawn, and then we have Apocalypse Now in 1980. There seems to be a trend here. I don't know. What do you? I know you can't occupy someone else's headspace, but what do you think about sort of his body of work and what that says about the characters he's trying to depict?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think also Conan is on that list because I think he is.
I think you're right, actually.
So there's definitely he's definitely got a certain vibe he's shooting for. And again, and through kind of like the half-assed internet research did before this, like apparently he did try to join the Marine Corps in the early 60s.
Oh, no kidding.
And was denied several times because of asthma or some other health related issue or whatever, and maybe kind of carried that with him of like, well, if I'm not going to be able to actually get in the game, then I'm going to do what I can to try to promote that vision of kind of the hyper masculinity and the But I think a lot. It's easy to write that off as kind of like just a softball. It's an easy layup. It's easy to write that. But I think if you look back on his body of work, like there's the stories are, the narratives are simple, the messaging is simple, kind of the overarching construct of the story is simple, but there's a lot of complex emotion and contradiction that kind of like bubbles beneath it, right? And that's sometimes that's that can be hard to dig into when you're just looking at Arnold Schwarzenegger's biceps or Sean Connery and
loincloths.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, I think it definitely exists, and I think that's why a lot of those movies still resonate. Like they're still. I still know people that have kids now that are old enough to watch like the original Red Dawn and stuff and love it.
Yeah, I mean it is.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember the days of having that same VHS copy of Big Wednesday being passed down, from generation to generation. So yeah, there's just it's a certain, again, it's like I think kind of. To me, in a lot of art, like style is everything. Like I put style ahead of even kind of the story, and I think I like when people commit to like kind of that certain. People get pigeonholed in certain genres or whatever, but I like it when I know right away. Like if I watch like the first 5 seconds of a John Milius movie, like I know it's him, or I would at least guess it was him, right? Based on just kind of the overall the aesthetic. Kind of the vibe, even the way they score some of the movies and a lot of the editing choices and stuff, which I think is cool. And I like that. Same in music. I like when I hear a guitarist or something and I know who that. It's a very maybe a lot of people think I've been pigeonholed stylistically or something, but I dig that. I think it kind of gets to the broader, especially in the literary world. I deal with this as a novelist where it's like literary fiction versus genre fiction, right? And I think those are kind of false distinctions in some ways, and I think there is a certain art to being able to go back to the same genre well over and over again and create compelling stories. So I think sometimes I would rather something be good than wholly original. And that's again that's so a lot of the Milius films I think are like that for me, right? It's like comfort food.
Yeah.
But they're substantive. There's a lot to chew on, but
Sure.
they're easily digestible.
Yeah, when I was going through grad school, we had a poet come and speak to us, and he told us, like, stop worrying about being derivative. He says every story is derivative. Like the only original story was the Bible. Everything else is is a derivative of that. And so he went on and on to give examples, but I thought that was really profound. Is like, yeah, why am I why it's sort of like when I used to look at emo kids when we were growing up in high school. Like, why are you conforming so hard to be a nonconformist? And like, why am I pigeonholing myself so much and trying not to pigeonhole myself? Nancy, what do you think about that? Do you think that that there's something that we can glean from his body of work, or is it just coincidental for the time period? The market was kind of demanding these kinds of movies.
Well, so while you guys were talking, I did some of the research I should have done before today. But I was looking
am I
up,
right?
yeah, I was looking up some of the other credits that John Milius has, and learned that he wrote the screenplay for the movie Jeremiah Johnson, which is a favorite in our house. And so I'm now starting to weave all the threads together, and I do feel that there is a voice that you can clearly hear in a John Milius film. And I also happen to know that he is a strong proponent of the Second Amendment. And so it's no surprise that there are little vignettes in his films showing firearms in a in-depth and accurate way instead of just a prop. That they're kind of an integral part of the story.
Yeah, it explains a lot why Conan the Barbarian was talking about the M1 Grand. I'm kidding. Sorry, bad stupid joke.
No, but I mean, I'm not anywhere even close to I'm looking at this list of films. I'm not, I don't know all these movies as well. And honestly, I got to tell you, I did not watch Conan the Barbarian when it came out. I saw bits and pieces of it, but that was just not for me. Like, no.
You gotta go back and watch it. Like, it's so good.
Go ahead and judge. I really don't care. But I don't know how to say this, but they feel like man movies, and I don't mean that as an insult. I mean, I don't know how to say it.
No, I think you're onto something there, though. I think I know what you're getting at.
I mean, it's a sort of tricky business to say this kind of thing in 2026, but I just think they're very masculine movies and with very manly masculine characters. And I don't use the phrase toxic masculinity because that's not my thing, but I just think there's nothing wrong with that it's okay to have this is a character in a movie. He's not like creating a real person. So in my opinion, it's okay to have just a very masculine man and a very feminine woman as characters in a movie. There's nothing wrong with that. So
yeah, I think where that gets problematic is just when you make them two-dimensional, or when you're trying to prop up and regardless of whether you're talking about masculinity or femininity or whatever it is you're talking about, but when you try to prop it up as something to be emulated, like something to be consumed. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
yeah.
Like,
and I was gonna say, I think they did a great job with that with the Candice Bergen character in The Wind and the Lion, right? I mean, because she's Linus. Like, yeah, I mean, she is a very kind of demure, kind of classically feminine, mother, protector, etc. But I think they did a good job of showing.
She's not a damsel in distress. She's not a damsel in distress. But also,
oh, go ahead.
So if that same movie had been made, this year or now, she would have been the badass savior of the. She would have taken all the prisoners and kicked all the asses, and the men would have been, these they would have been stupid, and they would have been more, I don't know, they would have been more kind of some equality there between the female lead and the male lead. They were both tough in their own ways. And you didn't have her saying, damn it, if I was a man, I could do, it's like she was who she was.
Yeah, and I think that's like kind of the true courage, right? And this is something that, like, I started discussions with female Marines that I worked with and served with, is like putting yourself in that situation, or once you're in that situation, knowing that you're at an inherent physical disadvantage, and still getting the job done. Like that's true courage. Like it's different when you're fearing for your safety and your children's safety, and you've got all that responsibility on your shoulders all day long, and you don't necessarily have maybe the physical gifts of your male counterparts, but yet you're still going to get in the mix and protect them and do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And I think the movie did a good job of showing that and showing the balance, but at the same time, not being some 90-pound bobblehead that's out there like hip tossing guys like twice her size and fight. It was very, they scoped it appropriately, I think, to where it felt more legitimate.
Yeah, I think too, and again, like, I think where these tropes get problematic is when they're two-dimensional and flat. And you see entropy between Razuli as he gets to know her more. You see her as she gets to know him more. Maybe there's some Stockholm syndrome stuff going on there, but he takes her to his palace and like, you're our guests. Like, why would I need guards? And then she sort of breaks down and admits that she kind of had him pegged wrong. But at the same time, to your guys' point, like, she's a total lioness when her kids are threatened. And so I think there's a dynamic there that kept it from being cliche. And at the same time, I mean, that is the human experience. And I mean, some people are certain ways, right? And I think when you don't show evolution, you don't have that sort of free tags pyramid of the characters having to deal with dilemmas, then it does, if they just are, if they're perfect all the time, even in their imperfection, it's boring. And so I thought that was cool, the way that they did that. And yeah, it is, again, sort of to your point, of it is kind of a trope, especially for the time period, but it wasn't flat.
Yeah, for sure. And just a quick shout out to the kids too. Usually I hate like kid characters in movies. Like, they're just usually because they're written poorly or the acting just doesn't come across or whatever. But I loved kind of their kind of evolution, right? Along with their mom, the Candice Bergen character, especially her son, which I thought was hilarious, because within like 48 hours of being captured, like, he's all in, right? He wants to be a brigand. He's like, I'm ready. Yeah, I'm ready. Give me the bandolier and the scimitar, and I'm ready to go out and start raiding with you guys. And like that whole. And it's just, having been that age, as as a little fellow like that, I get it. That part like really rang true. Sometimes just kind of the kind of the flash and the aesthetics and that kind of like, masculine appeal is enough to get you to be like, well, okay, our situation may not be great. We just got captured or whatever, but I could do this. Why can't I be a desert raider?
It's very Peter Pan, Lost Boys.
Yeah, good call. Totally. Yeah.
But I also like what, Josh, you're totally right about the kids. And I think one of the things that I dislike intensely about movies and television today, when there are kid characters and even commercials, is that somewhere along the line, we took this turn where adults are stupid and kids are the smartest ones, and I cannot stand that. So you didn't have, in 1975, that was not how it was. And so I liked that about the children characters.
Yeah, those kids were like what, like 10 or 12 at the time of shooting, so they're firmly Gen X, right? Like they know kind of that kind of persistent mild neglect from the boomer parents that kind of lets them get into their own
Lived it.
Exactly. Yeah, and I look fondly back on my own childhood of that, given a lot of rope by the parent. There was no such thing as like the helicopter parenting thing, and I, it was probably, if you flash back to 1904, when you're living in a place like Morocco, as an American family, it was probably even more so, right? There was a lot of room to run.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, last question here. Josh, what do you think Marines can take away from this movie?
I think just the spirit of adventure, right? That's always been kind of like a calling card of the Marine Corps, is like, no matter what your upbringing, what your origin story is, you can join the team and get out and get in the mix, even when there's not necessarily like a major war or campaign going on at the time, as is the case in this movie. And I think that's always been cool and appealing. The fact that we can just be like floating around with our Navy bros on the ship somewhere, and something pops off, and now it's punitive expedition time. Grab the Mameluke, get your dress blues, get your bayonet ready, and get ready to hit the beach. And I think that just that kind of that allure has always persisted like throughout the Marine Corps history, and it will continue to do so for sure. Because I think, especially if you look at kind of the spectrum of conflict nowadays, like there's always something going to pop off that can get you in the mix, if you're in the right place at the right time. I think that's kind of the enduring kind of like Marine Corps allure of this movie.
That's cool. Nancy, what about you? What do you think that the youngsters can get?
I'm not going to answer the question because I want to take my time to ask you guys a question. So you give your answer, and then I got a question to ask.
Okay, fair enough. So my thing with this is I would hope that Marines or service members would be curious in the similar way that we were. Josh, like you said, you're a history buff, so you're already in the beaten zone on that. But for me, I had no idea. I knew this wasn't Derna, and so I just did some internet sleuthing to figure out what the Petticaris affair was all about. And so that's what I would hope, that something that's entertaining, that's fun, has a bit of whimsy, but it's still, it's still talking about at least a historical period, an event that happened, even if it's overly dramatized, but it was well done, and it was done respectfully. And I would hope that it would ignite the curiosity to get into Marine Corps history and what is gunboat diplomacy, and also what does that mean now? Like, does the massing of ships in the Mediterranean look very similar to the massing of ships in the Gulf right before the Venezuela thing, and then, or did it look a lot like the Persian Gulf of the multiple times that we've had build-ups so just to start drawing some of those parallels and just getting curiosity about what history is. And to your point, Josh, like, what is it that the Marines did before World War I? And it's fucking cool.
Okay, here's my question for both of you. Josh, you start. What person or event from Marine Corps history do you want to see a movie about?
Oh, that's a great one.
That is a great one.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff that went down in the 80s that, only because of my research or my master's degree focused on domestic intelligence operations from 65 to 75, right? And then kind of some of the intelligence community reforms that impacted the DoD's military intelligence effort within the United States. But there was some like lingering stuff that drifted into the 80s, specifically around Iran-Contra. The fact that you have a lieutenant colonel on the NSC staff that's able to, for better and worse, orchestrate just the sheer amount of effort it took to get those different actors together. And again, with that, we go down some serious Iran-Contra rabbit holes here. But that's just one example of a lot of like peripheral things that went down in the 80s that the Marine Corps were involved in. some of the stuff in Latin America as well that I think would be really cool. And again, only because it kind of scratches that itch of like, I was old enough to kind of know like what was going on in the world, but I didn't have like any real like firm idea of like, how the Marine Corps was involved in any of it, or the Joint Force, broadly, and then the Marines, supporting efforts within that. I think there was a lot of stuff that, again, during the tanker war in Iran that went down, or in the Gulf that went down in the mid 80s as well. And plus, I just like that aesthetic, right? I think, someone who grew up on Miami Vice and a lot of like the kind of like the 80s, that's really firmly in my wheelhouse. And I would just like to know more about, because I've heard a lot. It's very hard to kind of, because a lot of those people are still alive, and because some of the stuff's not, hasn't been declassified. There was a lot of, really crazy things that the individual Marines and small units were involved in back then that I don't really know enough about, right?
Yeah.
So that would be something that I'd be really, really anxious to see.
Cool.
Come to life.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to see that too.
Me too. Yeah. Sure.
All right, Vic, what about you?
My answer might kind of suck. So I actually have two. I would like to see something done on Peter Ortiz.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
For sure. And then very close, if not equal, would be Chu-In Lee. I think those two stories are fucking so cool, man.
I would like to see a movie about Archibald Gillespie.
Oh yeah.
California. And listeners, go back to one of our previous episodes where we talked all about him. That would have been like last January?
I thought it was fall, but yeah, it was in our 250 series. Yeah.
There's a lot in all of, each one of us had a very different time period, very different selection, which just shows how rich with incredible stories Marine Corps history is.
Yeah, absolutely. So cool. Well, sir, thank you so much for joining us on this. Thank you so much for suggesting it. It was a much richer film than I had originally thought it was going to be. So
I'm going to watch it again.
Sure. I appreciate you having me on. I would close with it. There's still probably like, if I do have one regret from my career, it's that I've never used the line "hostiles to the left" in the real world, and that was a huge, that's a huge missed opportunity at some point, because that was definitely one of the enduring takeaways from the Winter Line. But yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Thanks for indulging my love of mid-70s American cinema.
This is fantastic. Yeah, you might have just signed yourself up for a reoccurring segment on our Semper Cinema.
Oh, great. Well, I'll actually be out there. I'll be in your neck of the woods in September, so maybe we can do like
nice.
a studio one. Yeah, so my buddy Ryan Murata is retiring, so I'm coming out for that one, and would love to do it.
Yeah, let's do aliens.
I'm in.
I haven't seen that either.
Okay, yeah. All right, sir. Thanks again. Have a wonderful time in paradise. We'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Litchman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.